the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good morning from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. The entomology people are back with us. This is 2 weeks in a row that we got entomology. Therefore, it must be bug time. Cook's here. Hat is cocked. No glasses. Tyler's here.
Stetson's in the truck.
Wrong brand.
It's a resistol.
I'm sorry.
We established that.
That's exactly right, and I have since
on
forgotten.
the stink bug episode. It might rain. It might not. We got a little rain last night. Therefore, we were able to get all four of us in the same place at the same time. Don and Tyler, thank y'all. What were you waiting on dry ground for this morning?
He was going to replant his mess up.
Yeah, I screwed up four cotton tests, so we'll try to get those in the ground as soon as we can, hopefully this afternoon.
Well, you make me feel better about myself. This has not been my best effort this year in management. So there's several screw-ups out there that could be attributed to me. Tom, you said y'all planted a bunch.
Oh, just too much in the last 3 days. I don't ever remember trying to run around and do that.
Tom has a newly administered tetanus shot, so he is currently up to date on his vaccines.
On that series of vaccines, let's not stretch that any further than what it needs to be stretched.
I just said you had a freshly administered tetanus shot.
Well, I couldn't remember the last time I got the last one.
Don, I've been waiting to ask you this. This popped into my head
Lay it on me,
last
brother.
week, and I said I have got to ask Cook this the next time we have him in the podcast. Assume, just sake of argument, time travel is possible. Where is Don Cook going, and who is he meeting?
Oh, Lord. Good question.
If I could answer for him.
Well, you know, if we're really going to be really honest on everything, we should go back and actually see Jesus.
Yeah, but
Aside from that,
that's everybody's answer.
aside from that, it's quite possible it would either be go back and be able to see Leonard Skinner in concert before the crash or Jimi Hendrix before he died.
Not where I was going in my head, but two acceptable answers.
I couldn't have picked those. I kind of figured it was going to be music related.
Okay.
Tyler, you want to weigh in?
It's all music related. I really like the Jimi Hendrix answer for sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm on board with that one, too.
Where do you think it was going?
Neither of those places. I really didn't have anywhere. I had something kind of preconceived in my mind just as a shot in the dark, and you weren't even in that ballpark, so we'll just...
The other thing, and I will throw this in as a kind of a side note, to be able to go back and go fishing with my dad again one more time, that would be a good one.
That's solid.
Very solid answer. I figured he would have said he wanted to be there with, Dale Earnhardt at Talladega or something.
I was there.
Well,
The last race he won.
Well,
Me and Jeff Gore were in the stands. I never got to go to many races because it just wasn't easy, and Jeff grew up just 2 hours from Talladega, so they went a lot. But me and him and Hank Jones went to the last race that Dale Earnhardt won.
I'll also say that I have another question for Don. So when we get to plant bug time, I got another one for him.
Playing way ahead.
All right.
that's a good grin.
I got on a run. These questions popped into my head, and Don immediately popped into my head shortly after. So that's got to be a Cook question.
I'm glad you're picking on Don.
I want Cook's perspective on these things.
Gentlemen, obviously insect issues. Thrips.
Yeah, it's that time of
Where
year.
do we
That
stand?
time.
So we can talk about ThryvOn a little later in the podcast, I guess, but because majority of the acres out there are non-ThryvOn still. So, and that's where we're seeing most of our issues. I'd say that we're probably at the point now where if you've got cotton in the ground, we're probably running out of seed treatment. Just about everybody's got some kind of a imidacloprid-based seed treatment, whether it's Gaucho or Eris or something else. But everybody's running imidacloprid, and everything I've seen in the past couple of years since I've been back to Mississippi, everything I've seen is still providing a lot of good control, until we hit about that two true leaf stage. And that's when the questions start coming, elephant in the room's acephate. I've heard that in some spaces it's still working real good. In other places I've heard it's not.
Which is the nature of insect resistance.
Kind of what you have to say there is if it worked for you, use it. We've got another option And that's about it as of right now.
Exactly. And I think we've been kind of lucky in spots. We've gotten these kind of frequent showers. It will beat the immatures off and keep them from building up and kind of help reduce some of the injury.
We actually used rain to prevent spraying some of our trials yesterday. And I said, let's just wait on this rain. Rain will knock them off. It does a real good job. If you go take Thrips samples after a rain and you run them through a wash method and you do some counting, all you're going to find is a bunch of dirt and mud.
Real driving rain will knock them off, and then a few days later, you'll see that adults start showing up, and then the reproduction starts again.
You mentioned acephate resistance, and Tyler, you said that it's basically working or it's not.
Right.
Does that kind of mirror the same pattern as what y'all described with the stink bugs last week? Is acephate just kind of going over a cliff on thrips, or has it been a slow build, Don?
There's a lot of variability on it. I say there's a lot more variability in thrips and acephate than it is stink bugs and pyrethroids.
Okay.
You can get good enough control in certain situations, and you may hit an area where it works really good, and you may hit another area where it's just awful.
When you talked about going off the cliff, Steve's been doing our collections we've been sending. He's been doing some resistance monitoring, and it seemed like 2020 we sent collections and it was okay, 80% control, and then 2021, 2022 it was 40, then 20. So where we're making our collections, it is, I would say it's going off the cliff. But like we talked about, I mean, there's guys still in portions of the Delta that still harp on how good it looks, and it may be a matter of time before that changes.
It's just from our standpoint, we can't really recommend it because of the inconsistency. That doesn't prohibit anybody by any means from using it if it works in their area.
Yeah,
exactly.
So just a case-by-case situation.
Exactly. I mean, it's just that across the board, we cannot guarantee that it will do you a good job. Therefore, it is our responsibility to be more conservative.
Well, and is the nature of that resistance so that it's going to be geographically centered? And if somebody has used acephate in the past and it looked good, is it going to not look good this year? And should they not try that again? Or what are you going to make that choice on?
I would say if you've had problems with it in the past, that might not be your first choice.
Right.
But most people, and this is what I would do if I was in their situation. If it works, because of the price difference, I'm going to use it till it fails on me.
I would agree with that. And it seems like if it worked for you last year, and we can get into price because that's the next big thing. Acephate's cheap in comparison to what our other option is. But if the growers are happy with it, that's what matters. I mean, if you go out in the field and you're going to see damage even with the seed treatment, even with an acephate spray, but really all you're trying to do is manage that damage so that that cotton don't get behind. And if acephate's providing that, keep going.
Run it back a little bit on the seed treatment, Tyler. You mentioned the imidacloprid seed treatments are basically timing out.
Mm-hmm.
I would say our cotton planting date scattered out a little bit, not as much as our other crops, but I think a big chunk is probably in the neighborhood of 3 weeks old. So it's, like you said, up in that 2-leaf stage now. So what's the expectation from that seed treatment?
I looked at some data from last year where I graphed it by sample date, and we did 1, 2, 3, 4 true leaf. And at 2 true leaf, our thrips, our immature thrips, really started to pick up, but the damage was still low. And then once you hit that 3 true leaf, it was like, whew, it went straight up. And I mean, if you're scouting around 2 true leaf and you're starting to see some damage, I think that's the time that if you're going to make foliar applications, if you've got thrips populations bad enough that you need to make a rescue application, 2 true leaf is the time that you need to be lining that up.
So that treatment's still meeting expectations.
Don and I had talked about this yesterday. I wasn't around. Well, I was around, but I was a rookie when Cruiser was still being used. I was kind of coming to when that was coming off the market. But even when seed treatments were new, how long were they providing, Don?
With Gaucho and Cruiser back in the 90s and early 2000s, I mean, just the nature of it is like 14 to 18 days. Occasionally you could see 21, but
So it sounds like it's similar.
it's
to what we're
it's
still
very
seeing.
similar. About 2 weeks after emergence was about it. Yeah, there was some cases where it went a little further, but still, that's about as far as most folks banked on it.
I can't let this go. You were somewhere south of a rookie in the 90s. Sorry, dude.
No. When
I was talking about
when I turned 18 and went to work for Dow, that was when all the cruiser stuff was starting
Okay,
to
so
break.
you're saying you're on the backside.
I was on the backside
Okay.
of when
Okay.
me and Nick seed treatments were new.
Dodge spouts out 1990s, and I'm thinking, I don't believe Tyler was interested in thrips in the 90s.
No.
Tom didn't know what a thrip was in the 90s.
Truth.
I had to gig that one in there, Tom.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Well, the other component on thrips is growing conditions. You've got really good growing conditions. Cotton's growing really fast. Your goal is to get past that fourth true leaf stage. And the faster it goes through there, the less you got to deal with thrips. So if you got good growing conditions, unless you just have astronomical numbers and or other stresses, it can tolerate a lot and you can get through it pretty quick and may not have to make an application or may not only have to make one.
Why is that fourth leaf stage kind of the cutoff for damage? Is it just the plant hardening off some?
Well, yeah, you've been around cotton long enough to know that till it gets about 4 or 5 true leaves, you swear it's looking for a reason to die, and then it catches another gear about that time, and that growth, above ground growth, seems to accelerate.
It just outruns thrips at that point. That's kind of what we'd call our termination. 4 true leaf, 5 true leaf. We're not worried about thrips anymore. Those growing conditions are extremely important. I mean, you want good soil moisture, but not so much that you leach your, whatever seed treatment you got on there is, and you don't want that cotton stalemate, and you don't want it too terribly cold, especially at night, where that cotton sits there. The longer it sits there and it's not putting on any growth, the more time thrips are feeding away at it. And last year here on station, it seemed like we had real good growing conditions, but our thrips pressure was so high that our cotton, where we didn't spray it, it's to the point where I was spraying some of our cotton tests for thrips just so they didn't die.
Then how's this year stacking up compared to last year?
So
from that perspective,
from what we planted, we were actually a little bit later planting this year than we were last year, and that's just because it's be a week, catch a rain, be a week, catch a rain.
There've been some environmental
so
challenges.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
It's interesting though. We went out there and looked at our thrips test on Monday, and it was just putting on its first true leaf. And I kind of jumped the gun a little bit because I was ready to spray some tests. We went ahead and pulled the trigger, and there wasn't a whole lot going on out there. I went back on Wednesday for my 2 to 3 day rating, and it's eat up. So it all happened quick. But like what we just talked about, rain, who knows what happened to them, after last night. Yeah, it came on quick.
But I think overall we've had pretty good growing conditions for cotton. I mean, it's been pretty warm, not excessive. Well, some places have had excessive rain, but overall it's been pretty decent. Therefore, you wouldn't have had any conditions that would slow that cotton's growth down, and the slower that cotton's growth, the fewer thrips it takes to bang it up.
Yeah, we haven't had what you would call a cool night
No,
since the majority of this cotton's even been in the ground.
Yeah.
It's been really good
except for
temperature-wise.
Except for the cotton that got planted real early, it's already squaring.
Here on station, we planted some cotton in mid-April, and that cotton in mid-April and early May, and both of those cottons are 4 to 5 true leaf, and some are pushing 6, and we didn't have thrips issues at all. So plant date played a role, but that was a plant date study. So I plant late for pressure. That's not a good idea if you're trying to outrun thrips.
But adjusting the planting date for cotton is not.
Yeah,
You don't have as much margin for error there as
Right.
you do with soybean or corn plant, because
Yeah,
you can really go.
you gotta be
side.
smart about
Yeah,
it.
I mean, you
Late
can really
cotton
go
is
side.
not something you want to deal with.
no.
Well, I was talking about real early cotton.
Well, you're right. There's a sweet spot. You can go too early and too late
Yep.
and cause yourself problems.
Tyler, you mentioned a couple times the other option for thrips insecticide wise in addition to acephates?
Our other option is Intrepid Edge, and we've been, ever since we've been pushing the use of Intrepid Edge in spots where acephate resistance is prevalent, we're kind of learning a little bit more about this product. Folks have been calling it has a really short residual, because what you're getting out of Intrepid Edge is not the methoxyphenazide, it's the spinedoram that's providing all the control there, and it just doesn't have a long residual. So I think what we're doing is, we know that spinedoram it'll wipe the floor with thrips. I mean, it just knocks them out, but with you not having much residual, they reinfest real quick. We had the discussion yesterday while we were walking thrips plots that managing your expectations on that Intrepid Edge shot is really important, because you're going to kill what's there, but you're going to see them right back. I mean, adults are everywhere. Adult thrips are everywhere. They'll fly into the field as soon as you make an application, and you pick up a cotton plant and see an adult thrip. Now, that's what we call reinfestation. That wouldn't necessarily be a control failure. Like I said, just managing that expectation with that product. It is significantly more expensive than acephate is. So that's another thing to weigh when you're making these decisions.
When you start comparing Intrepid Edge, the spinedoram component, to acephate, they behave differently too. Acephate is systemic to some degree. It will move in the plant into new tissue. Spinedoram will not.
Especially this time of year when cotton's growing quick, that can definitely affect your control.
Tyler, you'd said early on that we should talk about the ThryvOn cotton because the bulk of our acres aren't ThryvOn at this point, at least in 2024. What's the expectation of that for 2025? Are those acres stand to increase?
Yeah, I would imagine that ThryvOn's going to continue to pick up. I think for the past 2 years, they've dropped price on seed. Both years, it was real expensive when they first tried to commercialize it, and it's come down to the point where we're not making thrips application, and you may omit one plant bug application. When you put that money together plus cost of application, I think that technology is worth, the extra price you're going to pay for that seed. And we do ThryvOn tests every year, really focusing on thrips, because we've heard in the past that some folks think they see thrips damage on ThryvOn cotton. We have not seen anything like that. I mean, it's pristine in all of our thrips trials, and this is an incredibly heavy thrips pressure. Last year, like I said, we were row to row. We were having to spray cotton to keep it from dying, and the ThryvOn looked just relatively untouched. So especially as it gets more difficult and more expensive to control thrips, I think it's a real good time to have some new technology that kind of wipes them off the slate coming to market. I think that may drive some adoption.
The other part of that, you're talking about the damage. This is a protein in the plant, so they're going to have to feed some to be exposed to it.
Yeah, and the damage that we do see, we rate everything from a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being a perfect plant and 5 being a nearly dead plant. We say that a 3 is what we would call an economic threshold, where it's crinkly, silver leaves, it's to the point where it's slowing down cotton growth. That's what we would consider a 3. I think the max that I've seen is like a 1.5. I'm talking, you've got a good plant that may be curled up on a leaf or two, and that's it. And this is consistent. We've looked at a lot of ThryvOn cotton, and we haven't seen anything that worries us about thrips and ThryvOn. Now, you can get into things like chemical burn and sandblasting, but it's important to know what you're looking at, because not everything that looks like thrips is always thrips.
Do either of y'all want to touch on the proposed situation from the EPA regarding acephate?
So the EPA has proposed that they're canceling all acephate labels for use of, it's really across crops, anything other than tree applications.
That's the proposed interim decision, and it's in comment period right now.
Yeah, and it's speaking on comment period, it's incredibly important for all of our listeners to at least make the effort to make some kind of comment. I think that EPA does read those comments, and it can weigh in on their decisions.
They do. They should be short, sweet,
Yep.
to the point, and they'll carry more weight if that's how they're posed when
Yep.
that individual makes that comment.
But yeah, in terms of potential label vacature for acephate. It's not only an issue with thrips, it's an issue with tarnished plant bugs, because acephate is a huge plant bug control option for us in cotton. And if you sit back and think about what you normally spray for plant bugs in cotton, it's something in Orthene, or it's Transform, or it's Diamond. And if we lose Orthene, you're looking at Transform, Diamond, and what else?
In a non-ThryvOn cotton situation without acephate, we're going to put some extreme selection pressure on Transform.
Yeah, we would have a couple more years with Transform if that's all we really had to spray, and you'd see some significant reduction in efficacy. I think that in light of this ruling, if it were to come out as proposed, it's going to big time drive up some ThryvOn acres for sure.
I know we've been talking about cotton, but this rolls into soybeans as well. If we get in a bad red banded stink bug year, that's where acephate is very useful.
The gold standard.
Can we get by with it in a non-red band year? Possibly. Maybe a little more expensive, but we get in a bad red band year like 2017, where we're making multiple applications for stink bugs. It would be very difficult without acephate from several aspects.
If you lose acephate, your next big option is pyrethroids, and if all you got is pyrethroids and a couple neonics, they're not going to hang around very long either.
Well, then you get in the situation, I know we've kind of taken a left turn here, but the big one is bifenthrin, but by label, you can only put it out once every 30 days. And then you start looking at pre-harvest intervals for things, and acephate had one of the shorter pre-harvest intervals. Particularly, you know, if you're getting big migrations from your neighbors in, or if you get into certain situations like they did in a few places where there's so many stink bugs when they're cutting them, the elevator says, do not bring any more back because we're fixing to start counting them as foreign matter. And that really complicates things as well. It's a pretty multifaceted issue with acephate in, you know, Mid-South agriculture.
Well, I think those are important things for anybody to consider at this point, because it's not just one use for that particular group of products. You're managing thrips at one point in the season. You're managing stink bugs later in the season on a different crop. That's important to consider then during that comment period.
We may have alternatives that are already on the market, but we're not getting what you would call true replacements being labeled at a rate that's
sustainable.
Well, that, you know, that's keeping pace with what we're losing.
Hey, Tom, way to take a really positive podcast and suck the wind out of it there at the end.
Sorry.
Well, thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
We will get you back in here, I guess, next. Will be plant bugs, Don.
Yes, it will. Or it will be something crazy we hadn't thought of.
Right.
Let's hope not.
Let's not do that just yet. Stop. Just stop. Don't speak that into existence. It's good to see y'all in the same room.
Y'all go count your critters, Don.
Will do.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.